Hello and welcome to Family History with Chris. I am Chris and thank you for joining me today. I just wanted to share with you this time around uh, some history on my great grandfather. This is Owen Winford Ricks, born in 1900, and I am grateful for Sally Lewis for downloading uh, these tapes. Uh, Winford, uh, my great grandpa here, uh, attempted to do his own life story on some tapes, and back in 1966, things weren't as good as digital is today or whatever. So uh, it truly is worth more than gold to me. Uh, but I wanted to share this with you. Uh, this is the first of, I believe, 4 tapes. We're just going to try this out and stuff. So I hope you enjoy. I know I did, and I I believe that writing down your own life story or writing down the life sketches of others is very important. Um, you never know who's going to read it later on or who's going to hear it, and it just brings knowledge and helps others understand who this person is. So, with that, I hope you enjoy, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks. Bye.
I'm going to attempt to record my life's history. This is Owen W. Ricks, age 66, recording, starting my recording August the 17th, 1966. I, Owen Ricks, having been born of exceptionally good parents in May the 16th, 1900 at Salem, Idaho, about my first year of birth, life, after being born, about all I can say is that I lived this part of my life with the grandest pair of parents that anyone could ever have. They properly fed me, clothed me, and cared for me, and above all, the most important thing in this life, they had given me I was born under the new and everlasting covenant to a pair of very, very faithful parents. And as long as I can remember, I have had a testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is the greatest gift that and circumstances under which anyone can be born. My father was John Ricks. My mother was Julia Frederica Hanson Ricks. Second year of my life was spent in like manner, and arriving at age 2. In my third year of life, I started to have faint recollections of my pioneer heritage. As my first recollections is being born in living in a modest little home at Salem, Idaho. There, back out in the yard, away from the house, was the tall sagebrush that had been there for all time. This little homestead was fenced with a substantial barn for care for the horses and corral for them to run in and get their exercise, a water trough for them to have water. Joining this little home across the street was a 40-acre tract of land which my father farmed. I might say here that a little about my father's activity prior to this time. He had worked as a young man for his father his father Thomas C. Ricks had been chosen and sent to the Upper Snake River Valley to settle, to establish a settlement. This settlement was established at Rexburg, Idaho in 1883, is the best of my knowledge. And father being one of a very large family, being that my grandfather had 42 children, my grandfather had taken a contract to grade the roadbed for a narrow gauge railroad from Cache Junction, Utah, which is in the northern part of the Cache Valley, in which Logan is situated. From there to the vicinity of Dillon, Montana, which I think is correct. To now Camas, DuBois, Spencer, and then up the Beaver Creek Canyon, over the Oneida Pass into Montana, and on up to the approximate vicinity of Butte, Montana. As my father was just a small boy, hardly large enough to do the heavier work, his job was to lay the spikes along on the ties so that the older brothers and the older men could come along with their big sledgehammers and fasten the rails to these ties. This job was completed, and my father came back to the valley, to his home. He met my mother and they were married. At that time, he was working for Jacob Brenner as a blacksmith in the Jacob Brenner blacksmith shop in Rexburg. By the way, a portion of this shop still remains, of the old shop still remains, just west of the courthouse of Madison County at the present time. After about 4 years with Jacob Brenner, my father moved over and created the little home where I was born and purchased this 40 acres of land. There he also maintained a blacksmith shop. I will now proceed with my 4th year. At this time, I have many recollections of this period of my life. Being a very active boy with a number of other very active boys in the family at that time, I had an older brother, John, Earl, and Henry, who were older than I, and Kenneth had been born, and Archie had been born as a new baby at this in my 4th year. And I have very vivid recollections of these times, especially of the things that little boys like in that age of life, that of candy, which at that time was hard to come by, cash. The early years of my life, about that time, the year 1905, was in the fall of the year. I had barely turned 5 years old. My parents decided to start me to school in the Salem school. I went down, and as I remember, I was a very backward child. And yet to not show this fear that I had, I got to acting up in class. And as a punishment, the teacher stood me up in the corner. This brought on more rough action. So they were only using one room of a 2-room schoolhouse for all 8 grades. So teacher put me out in the spare room, which wasn't heated and was very cold at that particular time, and I caught a bad cold, which today we would call the flu. In those days, we called it the grip. And I was very sick, so I was taken out of school and unable to go again at this place of Salem. So after we moved to Teton, they then enrolled me in the school down at Moody Creek, which was closer to home than the Teton school. This school being about a mile south, little over half a mile east from where we lived up at Moody Creek. And there I went to school and did very good in school, except that I had become much bolder with this added year, and the boys was playing a game which we called Dare. We would get in a line, and the leader would go along, and he would do different things that we had to do. This eventually consisted of stepping across the little irrigation ditch there and stepping it with one foot. The next time along, we would, the next bravest person would jump in it with both feet, and he'd get to be the leader. This is what brought me the leadership of the group. And in order to keep this leadership, I ended up in wading out into a canal, which was way up past my waist, and I was very, very wet, but yet very interested in this intriguing game, as I was the leader over quite a group of boys, many of them larger than I, but none of them would quite dare do the things that I'd been doing. So at just about that time, the bell rang. I woke up to the fact of where I was and what I was doing, that my next move would be to go into class and sit down in my seat. Well, I had to go in. I started in, and the teacher caught me about the time I had made 3 steps across the floor, and as I stood there, the water ran off from me in a puddle, and the teacher sent me home. I don't remember the teacher, whether it was a man or a woman, but anyway, they sent me home. And I started back home through the fields very reluctantly, not wishing the anger of my parents on arriving home. This was about just a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was quite hot. I went up into what we called a gravel pit up in the side hill where our neighbor, Jim Gardner, had dug a hole in the side of this place deep enough in order to reach the gravel level and take out gravel for some purpose or other. In this hole, the sun shone quite brightly and made a nice hot oven. And there I stayed until my clothes dried, but this took the process of all afternoon. By the time I got home, my brothers had got home before me. So the end of this episode, nothing too much came of it. This is the last episode I remember of the school, Moody Creek School, because then we had been in the area long enough. We found out that the district would allow us, in fact we belonged up to the Teton School, where we would go to church, where we felt that it would be better to have the same friends in school that we knew in church, and there establish our home. This we did. The time went on very uneventfully. 1906, 1907, 1908, and so on up through the grades. I will insert this thought that I was quite in trouble all the time with my tonsils, or with a throat condition that caused me to have tonsillitis several times a year, which would keep me out of school to a great degree. My brother Ken, just 20 months younger than I, he was just the opposite. He never had a sick day in his life till way later in life. But through this sickness, I think I learned to appreciate my mother much more than I would have done if I had not had this sickness, because at all times of the day and night, when she had any of her children sick, she would be right there to care for them and give them every care necessary to help them recover. In those days, we relied on our Heavenly Father by faith, by the laying on of hands, and home remedies, which in a lot of cases were very, very valuable. In other cases, they were very useless. But nevertheless, this is the way we went on in these pioneer days. Give anything in the world if I could remember more of these experiences. They were grand experiences. Because of this sickness, I got quite behind in school. My brother Ken caught up to me, and we went through school together as a pair of twins would have done. He being large for his age, and with the sickness I had, I was rather puny and small for my age, which made us about the same size. However, in the field, working, and I'll say this, that at that time, at a very young age, even as young as 5 years old, because of the large number of cows we acquired on this trade and at this time, even when we were 5 years old, we'd have as many as 3 to 4 cows each to milk night and morning before going to school, and then again at night after coming home from school before going to bed. We were always kept very busy in making a living, or helping our father to make a living for this large family, which we enjoyed. We had lots of horses which we drove wherever we went, horses which we rode. Any time we wanted to, we had a horse to ride, which we really enjoyed growing up on these horses. I'll also say that at that time, the farms were mostly in the valley, and that the foothills of the valley were all in the primitive condition, sagebrush and grass. We used to drive our cows back and herd them all day in this sagebrush. And as the farms crept back, it'd be farther for us to take our cows. It finally got so that I remember going as far as 8, 9 miles, driving the cows out in the morning to this feed and then bringing them back at night in time to milk them. This consumed a lot of our summertime. Of course, in the winter we had to feed these cows with the grain and alfalfa hay and so forth that we had raised for this purpose. This was a glorious life, growing up in this way. I want to devote quite a little time to telling you of our church life. We had a very full church life. That is, on Sunday, this entirely would be devoted to our church activity, which would include Sunday school and sacrament meeting and priesthood meeting. These meetings we never missed, and we would look forward with great delight to the opportunity we'd have of going to the Stake Tabernacle. My first recollection is going to Stake Conference over in the old Ricks College, the first one that was built for college. I'll now sign off this episode as the tape is running out.